Welcome back to Embracing Words with Coach Najwa Yasmeen of Words in Action LLC. In this series, we discuss various books and how books impact us. I hope that you are able to use your books to reflect, determine, and act, and to finally write your own story. Hey y'all, this video has been a long time coming, but I am excited to introduce you again to Johnna Renée, a fellow coach. She is specifically an evidence-based life coach who does a lot with movement and helping people move forward. Today we will be discussing Atomic Habits by James Clear. This book was recommended to me by Johnna, and it will be a great discussion with various points of view. Here's a bit more about Johnna. Johnna is an evidence-based life coach who helps make the self-help finally make sense. She uses research-backed studies to explain why we do and don't do the things that we do, and teaches her clients the proven tools they need to empower them to do the work of learning who they are and living confidently as that person. Her mission in life is to teach you all the things no one ever told her so that you can save time and tears trying to figure it out all by yourself. And you can find her doing just that over on Instagram at Hey Johnna Renée. And you can check out her website at www.johnnarenee.com. So grateful that everybody is joining Johnna and I today as we are talking about James Clear's Atomic Habits. Today is going to be, yes, look at that, showing it off. Today is going to be a great conversation about what we took away from the book, what you can expect from the book while you are engaging with it, and different ways in which you might be able to move forward with habits based on our personal anecdotes. As we get started today, I'd like to let you know a few different things. One, as I was reading through the book, I enjoyed some of the content around what it meant to create habits based on your personality needs or individualizing it to yourself. Understanding the Goldilocks rule or the zone of proximal development, but also looking at some terms you may have heard before: habit stacking, habit shaping, and making sure you have a supportive community and environment while you're creating habits. Something that did come up for me while I was reading the book, and that might be a warning for those who might find certain topics to be agitating. Just to be aware that the author is writing from a space of privilege. And so at times there are some comments that are heavily focused on weight loss or eating habits. And so they can be taken as fat phobic. It might be content warning for that. May indicate some comments or topics or spaces in the book may indicate socioeconomic privilege. Some ableist language is used. And there are many colloquial English phrases or sayings that are also included that might be hard for folks who aren't necessarily as versed in those colloquial sayings. And finally, if you're not big on sports, just be aware there are a lot of sports analogies in this book. But those are just my thoughts. I also know that I've heard really wonderful reviews about the book. That's what I came across. That's how I was introduced to it. Thank you, Johnna. And so I would love to hear other perspectives on the book as well. Johnna.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I always love hearing your approach on things because I think that you have such a well-versed, such wisdom when it comes to like what you bring to a certain, like any book that you read, right? Like, whereas I think most of us, we don't want to speak for everyone, but I know for myself, whenever I read, I'm very much just like there to consume it kind of a thing. And so I don't often think about, the ways in which it comes across other than like just like face value. As you know, like I am a learner. I like to read like a lot of like nonfiction things, and like I think so. This is true. I feel of most of us that we are in the age of consumption and not necessarily application. And so I think that a lot of us don't often take the time to consider these different perspectives and what it's actually like if you were to implement them, because we just don't ever do those things. And so I think that that is something that is worth noting, and like a testament to what you do and just how you present this information, because I think it's a real value add that no one else is offering. So I wanted to thank you for that and say that. And um, from my point of view, whenever I read this is my second time reading it. And it's something where when you shared, and thank you for doing so, that you were like, I have some thoughts. I was like, wow, I've only heard not just like it's an okay book, but like it's such a good book, like blah blah blah, like really talking it up, and myself included. And so I was like, I wonder what it was. And when I got to thinking about it, there are a lot of techniques offered in this book which can be great and can be useful. And at the same time, this is what we spoke about as well. If it's something where people are trying to do a habit and like create a habit and like, do this new thing, if you're then telling me, well, here's like a million ways to do it, then that can be overwhelming. Analysis paralysis, like, cool, I have the know-how. And oftentimes, we just kind of check that box. We're like, well, I know how to do it. Like I could if I wanted to. And I think that that relates back to a primal fear of failing. If we do implement these strategies and it doesn't work, then, that means we didn't succeed. And so to avoid that altogether, it's just like, well, I could if I want to. Like I've got the book, like I read it, like I know what to do. And then we just don't take action. And so while there are, yes, like a lot of good things you can take away from it, I think that you really have to kind of go through it through the lens of like, okay, what will give me the most return on investment based on my goals and where I am right now, and what's actually doable for me at this time in my life.
Mm, I love that. You said, what will give me the most return on investment, and what's most doable for you at this point in your life. When you said that, it reminded me, um, when I was reading the text, I was like, you know what? I can see some of the strategies and how they can be helpful. I also recognize how some parts of my life I would be like, yes, I would definitely use this. And other parts I'd be like, yeah, no, that's going to make me tap out real quick.
Right.
I'm not going to try it.
Right.
But alas, there were certain things I was also like, oh, this is a great reflection process for me around habit making that I have been doing. And what are some things that maybe I can alter at times, right? So with that being said, I'm curious to know, what are things that stood out to you in the text? And listeners or viewers, please know that we're going to be deep diving into our books and turning to pages at times. So just be aware.
So things that stood out to me, there, like you said, were several things that's like, oh, that could work, but also it's like there's so many things that could work. So what I was saying about return on investment, like what are the things that would work the best and give you the most return on that effort? And I think that the notion of working with our psychology and biology instead of against it, he talks about the dopamine reward system and making the habits that we want to create attractive. He offers 4 different ways to create. And so you want to make it easy, you want to make it attractive, you want to make it satisfying, and you want to make it obvious. Those were not in the right order, but in order to start a habit, you want to do these things because that's going to support your biological way your brain works with wanting to repeat that habit again, because it's easy to do and you get something satisfying out of it. Versus if there's a habit that you want to stop, then you want to do the exact opposite. And that's how he suggests you break a habit. You make it difficult to do, you make it unsatisfying, and the opposite of the other notions as well. And so I think that that's useful because out of all the things that he offers, like you mentioned, habit stacking, habit tracking, the Goldilocks rule, and all these other things and these examples. I think that one is one that we can kind of look at and apply to any of our goals or habits you want to create. And I think that that's something that's relatable and helpful, not only because, okay, well, just make it difficult, make it unsatisfying and like do these other things, but because it's something that we can all do probably to some degree. And so it's really accessible in that way. And one of the examples, I think it was this book, or it was Sean Anker's The Happiness Advantage, where he talks about wanting to learn how to play the guitar. And so he's like, it's just in the closet. Why don't I just open it and play for 2 minutes? But he ends up moving it to the center of his living room or something. And then he's like, oh, well, it's in the way. I'm like, I've got to pick it up and move it anyway. So he made it easy, and he made it accessible. And the way that he made it satisfying, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is that he would like check off like a list of like every time he did it. And it was satisfying for him to see the progress in that way. And so that's just like one example. But I do think that would probably be one of the things that was most helpful when it comes to how to actually make these habits stick. Because last thing I'll say on this is that I do like the premise that he speaks about, and how it's not, and he kind of preaches this throughout the book, it's not like the one thing, it's the many things that you do repeatedly that are going to, as we know as coaches, change your identity and become like just what you do, because that's who you are. Like, you're no longer trying to achieve the thing because you want to be the person. You're doing the things because that's just who you are. And you do that by making those things so, as I refer, stupid simple, that like there's no way you can't do them. You can't improve upon something that's not there. And I think that's something that he says in the book as well. And that's also worth noting, because so many times we're like, go big or go home. Like, I'm going to, set out to do this goal. Like, I've got to do it perfectly. And it's like, if you don't have the habit already there, then it doesn't make sense. You think about building a house. It's like, if I don't have the foundation laid, then it doesn't make sense that I would start putting walls up, kind of a thing. And so I think that that's also another thing to note when it comes. But what are your thoughts? What are your valuable points or criticisms even that you have like overall through like what he offered through the book? I love that, because I'm like, I've only heard good things. And so I'm just like, I love that, again, you have this perspective and this lens that no one, like, it's safe to say, I've not heard anyone say anything like on the contrary of it. So tell us your thoughts.
Well, I actually wanted to build on some things based on some of the stuff you shared. And then I will definitely share. It was funny because I looked up on Goodreads as well, and I was like, let me see if other people have the same thought. And I like clicked on the very few, like 1-star and 2-star reviews. And I was like, oh, other people are saying what I'm saying. And I was like, but these aren't the like highlighted ones, right? And I was just like, we gotta look for the people's different voices. I know you were talking about, well, first you began talking about the dopamine, the reward system, right? And how making it so the new habits are satisfying to us. And what does it look like for us to be able to do that? And I just found it interesting, the way in which he spoke about the different dopamine spikes. So when it comes to habits on page 106, the key takeaway is this: dopamine is released not only when you experience pleasure, but also when you anticipate it. And it really made me think, I'm like, well, how does this work when I'm thinking about different habits that I have, right? And I really thought about like journaling, for instance. I purposely have begun to put my journal on the side of my bed with a pen. I wake up in the morning, I can reach down, snatch it, begin my quick journaling. Now I have stopped myself so I don't do like an hour's worth of journaling and say, where's my morning go? I try to keep it short and simple so it's something that's feasible and easy for me to do. And so that way I'm like, I completely understand. And I know that the short-term reward is I have worked out something that has allowed me to process more, right? That has allowed me to see and give gratitude. Long term, it it's another version of self-care. And so that's going to help me long term. I will also say, slightly related, the dopamine piece made me think of Star Trek The Next Generations episode called The Game, season 5, episode 6.
I love
Um,
that you referenced that. Like, how did you have to look that up? How do you know?
I had to look up the episode. I knew which series it was, but I had to look up the exact episode because in this specific episode, somebody wanted to take over the ship, but they needed to have it so everybody on the ship had this bad habit of playing this game. And the way that they did it, the game was in a headset. And all it did was the higher levels you got, the more like dopamine hits you had, the more pleasure you got out of this game, right? And so then they created this bad habit and they had to sort of stop those receptors so people could get back on and like the ship isn't taken over. But I was just thinking, like, if you're thinking about that as a bad habit, you're getting so much pleasure from the bad habit. It goes with like, you need to make it unsatisfying, something that's not pleasurable for you. Me getting out of bed and walking to grab my journal is not pleasurable. Why? Because there's floors that are cold in the morning because I'm in the Northeast. And so just thinking about these simple things. You also talked about building habits based on identity. And so author James Clear speaks about identity-based habits. And I went back and forth on how I like this idea, because in the text I was like, based on what you're saying, I feel like most of what you're talking about is outcome-based habits. Like there's this reward and we're going to work towards getting this new reward. But I was like, okay, I see that. I was trying to pull out that. So when thinking about identity-based habits, creating habits that are in line with the core values that you hope to embody, the beliefs you hope to embody, and moving on towards that, and being very aware of that. It was interesting to hear the sentence frames, and I was trying to find those that James Clear listed about that. Let me see if I can locate it. And those sentence frames were like, I will, so if we take my journaling, for instance, I will complete my journaling because I am a person who likes to be self-aware and self-reflective. And just moving forward with that.
Yes. So I can remember one of those references because, so one of the examples he used was, instead of saying like, oh, I'm trying to quit smoking, identifying as I'm not a smoker. And saying like, when we tie our identity so strongly to the things in which we do. So for example, like if you are an athlete, that was one of the examples that he used, that if, something were to happen and you weren't able to work out anymore, like that would be pretty devastating. And so instead of saying like, I am an athlete, reframing that to say like, I am someone who is committed to becoming uncomfortable, or committed to working on my physical like capabilities, or like something like that, but something that phrases it in a way where, exactly like you said, it's not so much identifying with like the thing itself, but like what it gives you. And he talks about that too, which I thought was a cool point, where he's like, we don't always want the habit, right? Like the habit's not the thing. We want what we think the habit will give us. We want that satisfaction. And so it's oftentimes about, figuring out what we need to do in order to create that state, to get that outcome. And it doesn't actually always matter the ways in which we get there, which I thought was like an interesting kind of like,
Yeah. As you were sharing, it made me think of when the author was also talking about habit stacking. And this is where I was like, okay, I can start to see some of this. And it made me think of, so I used the Fabulous app for a period of time. I did really enjoy the Fabulous app, right? But I also knew there was a point at which I was just like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm like, I know I'm doing this so I officially have a morning routine and I'm creating new habits, but what is it beyond that? And so there was like very little intrinsic motivation for me, and it was more extrinsic because I'm like, ooh, I get the next part of the fabulous app story. I get get to check off the different things. But when it wasn't in line with like, I'm doing this to support myself in this way, then I wasn't as bought into it.
Right.
And so that's yeah, that comes up for me.
Oh, I think the sentences. So on page 38, each time you write a page, you are a writer. Each time you practice the violin, you are a musician. Each time you start a workout, you are an athlete. So simple two-step process he offers on page 39, how your habits shape your identity and vice versa. Number 1, decide the type of person you want to be. And number 2, prove it to yourself with small wins.
Mm-hmm. And then on page 248, in the chapter, The Downside of Creating Good Habits, he then goes on to say that if you're simply looking at defining yourself as, say, an athlete or a great soldier or a CEO, when you lose the things that go along with that identity, that causes you to lose your identity. So on page 248, he says, the key to mitigating those losses of identity is to redefine yourself such that you get to keep important aspects of your identity, even if your particular role changes. I'm an athlete becomes I'm the type of person who is mentally tough and loves a physical challenge. I'm a great soldier transforms into I'm the type of person who is disciplined, reliable, and great on a team. I'm the CEO translates to I'm the type of person who builds and creates things. When chosen effectively, an identity can be flexible rather than brittle. Like water flowing around an obstacle, your identity works with changing circumstances rather than against them. That's one of the places where I sort of wish this notion was on page 38, because on page 38, I noted a question: is there damage in making habits part of the identity? Does this mean identity may be easily shattered if you don't do things? And so I feel like 248 builds on that, but it takes a while to get to that.
Right.
And so what would it look like if those are combined rather than saying one way and then this other way?
Right. I think I totally see your point. And I think that goes back to like, again, like the testament of like you being in the mindset of what is this like in implementation? Whereas I think a lot of people are just like reading it. This is some good stuff. Because I'm just like, I mean, look, you were asking questions that were answered like 200 pages later, over 200 pages later. Yeah. Well, I'm not a mathematician, so don't come at me for that one. But yeah.
You're right. 210.
Yeah, like that's really cool.
Yeah.
That I think that is to your point about how like some things, like he said, you like when you think about them, which is actually a valuable way to, you know, integrate what it is that you actually learn, is to reflect on what you were going to be learning as if, you know, you were going to tell it to someone else, like we're doing like after the end of each chapter or each study session or whatever it is you do, which is actually a tactic from the book Limitless by Jim Quick. But I think when you do that, it gives you these different perspectives. And so these are things that people who just read the book to consume it and then talk about it aren't actually aware of or speaking to.
And so how do we encourage people to get into that reflection? That's the key question. I will say I was excited that the author noted the need for reflection in the like final section of the book. And I was like, yes, because reflection is key. Like, how are the habits supporting you or not supporting you?
Yeah.
I was actually curious on your thoughts around the habit contract. So when I was reading about the habit contract, I there were just certain pieces where the habit contract sort of seemed to go. Let me go. It related to the reward system, but also seemed more like a punishment system. And
Right.
coming from the education space, it made me
Right.
think of like the positive and negative consequences, right? And so the positive consequences would be the reward system, the dopamine system. The negative consequences, like what are the punishments if you don't actually like follow through on this habit? Um, and there were certain places where it was just where is it? Where he noted, like, if you don't do the habit, then how can you possibly different ways in which you might only be able to be seen. I'm trying to find the quote, so I'm gonna look for that quote. If you want to, I was asking your thoughts around the habit contract.
Yes. So I was looking to see if we could like figure out like the way he defines it. So the way that he, and correct me if I'm wrong because I'm looking, it says it's defined on page 208, but um it's basically just this contract that you sign with yourself or an accountability partner that says like you're going to do what you say you're going to do when it comes to taking action on your habits. And so
Mhm.
um yeah, like one of the examples he used, and this might be where your insight came from, like how it seems more like a disciplinary like situation, is that one of the examples, accountability, is if he doesn't wake up by a certain time, he has a tweet auto scheduled to say first 5 people to respond get $5 from me, like because I'm lazy. I didn't wake up on time today or something like that. And I'm like, yeah, that seems very much like masochist, like in the way where I'm like, I mean, I understand, like, you know, let's uphold our promises to ourselves, but also like let's give ourselves a little bit of grace, you
Yep.
know? And I'm not, we don't know what it means like behind the scenes. Like maybe if he had a rough night, something emotional is going on, like there's a family emergency, maybe he turns off that tweet. Um, but yeah, to me, that did seem like a little extreme. I see the benefit because the one dude was talking about how he made a contract with his wife and his trainer and it really worked for him. But also, if we are going to those links in order to force ourselves basically to do something, then that's chore energy over choice energy, which I'm like, nay. um, I think that we probably should talk to someone about that because that's not just about the habit. Like
Yeah.
there's something else. And so
Yeah.
while I see, and so this is again like another thing, like we often don't think about that. We read it and we're like, I mean, that's a cool thing to do. Like I guess it doesn't really feel great, but I see your point. But whenever we think about it, take a step back and look at the forest instead of the tree, kind of a thing, which I use that analogy all the time. I think
Mhm.
it's something where it's like, yeah, if you feel the need to coerce yourself into doing this thing, then that's, how healthy is that really at the end of the day? I don't have a contract with Najwa that's like, if I don't go for a run today, because
Yep.
one of my goals for 2023 is to do a 5K a quarter. And I was supposed to run today, but I've downloaded these recovery apps and it's like, not good today because
Yeah.
I did kind of do a lot. Like I've really amped it up in a short amount of time, which, you know, cool that I can do that. But at the same time, metrics that I don't actually have insight to. I know how my body feels. And also at the same time, like I know what the metrics say. So I'm using this as an example because I'm like, I'm of the position where I'm like, yes, I could tell myself, screw you, recovery that says I'm only at 1.8 out of 10 today. I'm going to do it anyway. But that seems more like forced whenever, something that has insight that I don't have is telling me, hey, take it easy today and like give yourself that grace to, just do it tomorrow. Like maybe you do some yoga today. Maybe I do some stretching. Maybe I go for a walk. And I'm using this example again because I think that this can relate back to if I had like a contract with myself, then I could be doing myself more harm than good, setting myself up for injury if I'm like not, aware in that sense. And so I think that I see the value in it potentially, but if that's the extreme that you have to go to, like maybe we should, yeah, reevaluate what it is that's why you feel the need to prove yourself in that way. Like why you
Mm-hmm.
feel the need to, in my case, why would I feel the need to run even when it's like, not today. 1.8 out of 10 is not good. So why would I feel the need to do that? And so I feel that there was a time when I would have, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm at a place, fortunately, where I'm like, no, like it's not worth it, right? And so that's kind of a long-winded response to say that I see what they're getting at, and also I'm like, is that really healthy?
Well, and you answered without knowing I had written it down. I have wrote a question on page 211. How does the habit contract relate to having grace with oneself? And I continued wondering that when got to page 236, there were two quotes that really stood out to me. And I was just like, I don't know how I feel.
So excited.
So the first one starts at the bottom of page 235.
Uh-huh.
We all have goals that we would like to achieve and dreams that we would like to fulfill, but it doesn't matter what you are trying to become better at. If you only do the work when it's convenient or exciting, then you'll never be consistent enough to achieve remarkable results.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go the two paragraphs below, starting at professionals stick to the schedule, amateurs let life get in the way. Professionals know what is important to them and work toward it with purpose. Amateurs get pulled off course by the urgencies of life.
Mm-hmm.
And all I could think of is like, if I had a habit contract, which I probably wouldn't do because that's just too constraining for me, and my type A personality would be like, I must meet it. I need to be aware, like, if I'm going through a situation and I need to be mourning or checking in with myself around how I'm doing or going through a grieving process, that is an urgency of life that I need to be aware of.
Right.
And take time to myself and have grace with myself, as you were saying, because yes, I can push through it, but which way is a good way to push through it? Is it time for me to push through and like go my hardest that day? Maybe not. What does it look like for me to slow it down that day and do what I can do and meet myself where I am? And that's just something that I kept thinking through as I've been in a space of like striving to move towards greater self-awareness and listening to my body and things. I need to have a space for grace. And then I was wondering, like, is there a way in this habit contract that people can create space for grace around for themselves? And
Yeah.
what would that look like?
Yeah.
So
I think so good. Yeah, I totally see what you're saying. I have a tendency to give myself a bit too much grace, full transparency. And then reading this quote back with you, like as you were reading it, I think that professionals stick to the schedule, amateurs let life get in the way, professionals do what's important to them and work towards it. Amateurs get pulled off course by urgencies. And so I think that a true professional, right, like a true leader, whether that be of others or of oneself, is someone who is able to recognize those urgencies and pivot accordingly, is what
mm,
I think. Because to take it to like my personal example here of how I'm leading self, I think that, yeah, like we spoke about like type A personality, like I could push through. And at the same time, like for the short term gain of being able to be like, I did it, is that setting me up for long term like loss,
yeah.
in the sense that in my case, like what if like I injure myself, like if I do push through because I'm not recovering enough. And so yeah, I see what you're saying about like the habit contract. And yeah, I don't know, like because they do offer in the book like a very rigid type of like it's this,
Example.
yeah, like pay people that, like both the examples, the one that about the tweet and the gentleman who like made the contract with his wife and his trainer, yeah, they're both very rigid. And so um again, I go back to my point of like, if you have to do that extreme, like what is that saying? Like I think that everything that he teaches in this book is about like small simple steps, like 1% better, right? So if I'm having to make such an extreme shift that requires me to make this really rigid contract, like am I even like, that's too far. And one of the things that I work with in my coaching of others is, first of all, like I said, previous, like younger Johnna would have been like, we're gonna go for a run, fuck you, 1.2% or 1.8% or whatever. Um, but that's taken me, like you said, like becoming more self-aware and knowing like who I am so that I can arrive at this place where I am like, oh, actually, you can just do it tomorrow. Like it's not, it's okay. And so, what are the simple steps that I can take? What's the 1% better that I can do that will set me up in a place where I can do that? Because whenever, from the quotes that we looked at that you shared, yeah, like sure, professionals, keep their eye on the prize and like show up like day after day, but at the same time, that doesn't always have to mean that like every rep is like 100%, right? Like sometimes, showing up for the day might mean showing up at 50%. And knowing that, and I think that this is something that he doesn't directly say in the book, but oftentimes it's about just like getting the paint on the canvas. It's about
Mm-hmm.
doing the things to continue to show up, because that does affirm that you are the type of person who does this. And then from there, we can build upon it. And like that's what I was saying about once the habit is established, once like you don't have to make contracts with yourself or anyone anymore. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
show up and put some paint on the canvas. Once that's just what you do, then is the time to start to amp it up, right? Like then's the time to start to increase the intensity or whatever it might look like based on your goals and your habits, and whatever that may be. But I
And
think that, yeah, the contract is like, it's a bit much.
it is. I do think that's where James Clear mentions the 2-minute rule and where you start on things with 2 minutes. And I find that more flexible and doable when you're thinking about that 1%, right? I was trying to find where it is. Oh no, I'm gonna have to look. But the 2-minute rule was helpful, as he was talking about. You want to start reading at night, read 1 page before you go to bed. You want
Yeah.
to start journaling,
Yeah.
journal for 2 minutes, stop and do no more. And thinking about that, that's how I sort of was like, oh, I need to do more meditative practices, right? So let me start off with like 2 minutes here. All righty, great. And now I'm like, I'm gonna work up with time. And so it's like that changes things when you take that amount of time, because it makes it into something doable. And then as you're seeing yourself have success, then you're like, oh, I can do something more. And you can keep going and keep going. And so that just really stood out for me. I was like, that's why I really like the idea of the 2-minute rule. I was like, yes. I was like, I can do that.
Yeah. And I love what you said. That's how, you've taken your journaling ritual and like taken it from, it's not going to be this hour-long thing. It's going to be this other thing, because that's going to give you the satisfaction in doing it. It's
Yep.
creating the habit, and you're getting your paint on the canvas that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you're getting ready to continue on. You're taking the small steps that lead to the bigger one.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And I think when we think of, I know I do a lot of conversations around the workplace, but I think that's why it's also helpful to, like, when you're looking at bigger projects, we note down like the smaller tasks, because those smaller
Right.
tasks help us to do the bigger tasks.
Right.
And what does that look like?
Right.
It's another thing that really was helpful when thinking about like doing smaller steps or doing that 1%, right? Atomic habits. You're doing changing 1% at a time. The Goldilocks rule.
Mhm.
Or when I read it, I thought I thought of Vygotsky's The Zone of Proximal Development. You find that space where you have a little bit of challenge and some success. And that's the place of growth. That's where you need to continue on. And really realizing like that's a great place to get started. And when he spoke about the personality tests and using that to note the places where you can get started and really move forward, I was like, yes, I'm like, I think that's a great way to look at it and figure that out. I'm wondering, do you use the Goldilocks rule or do you use personality tests for habit tracking?
Thank you for asking. So I am very big on strengths-based coaching. And so I was going to point that out or comment on that as well. So thank you for the space to do so. When it comes to setting goals, I think so many of us are like, I'm really bad at this. Let me get good at it. And sure, we can do that. But at the same time, positive psychology tells us that we need to have those wins in between. And so I think this is where what he refers to as the Goldilocks rule that comes into play, because it's something where, yes, like we can do that. And also, like, what are the little milestones that we can get in between then? I like to think of this as we're throwing it back here, but like Super Mario Brothers, right? So like you fight like the big guy, Bowser, but before that, you have all these little wins in between, right? Like you have to clear the levels. And so I think of goals in the same way. Like we need small wins so that we can remind ourselves, positive psychology, broaden and build theory. Yes, like you have done this. Now, what else is possible? How much bigger can you go? And so, to answer your question, I do know what my strengths are. And so, for example, the 5K a quarter is an example of that, like a small strategic win, and a Goldilocks, incorporation into that, in the sense that I don't like running. I'm not good at running. At the same time, I could totally do a 5K tomorrow, like if I had to, despite what my watch says, like I could totally do it. And so it's something where I know I can do it, but at the same time, there's part of me that's like, yeah, but can you? Like, you don't like to run, like your thighs chafe, like, eh. like, and so it is going to, for me, be something where now that I'm training to do this, because I actually want to get a certain time, right? I want to see like what's possible. Um, I've done a bit of both in that. Like I've done like strengths based in the sense that what I know about working out for the past 10, years, I know that yes, like this is, something that I can do in terms of like a strength in that regard, not a strength that I'm a good runner, because I am not, but Goldilocks in the sense that it's going to require some discomfort. And at the same time, when I do it and when I see that progress of like, okay, like in, February, that's when our first one is, in less than a month. This was your time. So when you do it again in May, let's see, like, let's see what's happened there. And so I get to actually see that progress or not, so that I can shift and pivot as needed to then go into like what we're going to be doing for the one in the third quarter. And so that's an example of how I'm using both of those.
That's fabulous. And also very exciting. And I
Thank you.
wish you the best in
Thank you.
February.
Thank you. My toes, these toenails are not looking cute.
Look, I've been thinking about doing something similar with the what is it? 3K? Is that what it's called? The walks. And I was like, oh, I like walking. Maybe I'll do that. A friend and I will go to the mall. We'll just rip out like 5K. There we go, not 3K. The 5K, which are 3-mile walks. And we'll just push out 3 miles easy. And then I was like, well, what if I made that a thing?
Yeah.
But I've thought about that. But that it reminds me of building trainings. It's something I really like to do, but as I get better and challenge myself more, like what are some more things that I can pull in to really encourage engagement, but also challenge me in my facilitation style and challenge me in what does it look like to make sure this is easily interpreted or heard or digested by many people.
Right.
And so really moving in that space.
I love that.
Thank you. So, how has Atomic Habits impacted you?
So I think the way it's impacted me, it's given me a lot of different tools that I feel I can apply with myself and like with my clients as I'm working with them, because there are like lots of good little takeaways in here. And while it can be a lot, I mentioned earlier, this is like my second time reading this. I think that as we reread things, like what we need to see and hear will like stand out to us. And so it's given me some tangible tools and things to offer that I can use to create new habits in my own life. And also, it's really helped to explain some of the things that I was like already kind of doing, or some of the things that I've started doing. I don't know if that's like osmosis, like from the book, like, just like my brain, or like what's happened there, but it's like, oh, like I kind of like do this thing. And so it's cool to be able to like understand it, because I feel that reinforces it that much more, and makes me want to um share it with others, because like I mentioned in the beginning about working with your psychology and like not against it, to make it, I pulled it up here. You want to make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. This is on page 54. And then to break a habit, you want to make it invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying.
Yep.
And so I think that that's a really valuable main takeaway that we can all apply. Not to be redundant there, but that has probably been the most helpful part, I would say. But if someone reads this or like is hearing this and they're like, well, where do I start? Like we spoke about at the beginning, it can be overwhelming. Then I have some suggestions of like what I would start based on my experience. I've read the book twice, and also like my coaching, that kind of simplifies it a bit.
Well, go ahead and share, because I'm curious. I want to know.
Okay, this is suspense. So I took notes here. So, okay. First of all, decide on your goals. Let's not do more than 3, right? Let's keep it simple. Like less is more, build the habit first. And then this is a question that he doesn't say directly in the book, but I feel is super impactful and powerful. And that is, what is it that you hope achieving that goal will give you, right? Like what is the thing that you think that goal is going to do for you? Like, how is it going to change your life? And then implementing the 1% rule, which, as we spoke, is simply like, how could you what are the things that you need to do to get 1% better? And then actually act on those things. Because like we spoke about, it's oftentimes we know what to do. We're in the age of consumption, but not application. And so it sounds so obvious, just do the thing, but we so often don't do the thing. And so whether that means an accountability buddy, like you mentioned, you're thinking about going on walks with your friend, or if you want to do the thing where you set up the tweet and like if you make a contract with somebody, like whatever works for you. But like we said, I don't know if that's like healthiest way to go. Make it stupid simple is what I like to say. Like, and I use the term stupid simple because I think, and have found what works, should be so simple to do that it's stupid, that it's like that's like the easiest thing. Like, how could that work? And so that's what I mean by stupid simple. And once you have done that, set up a regular reflection process, which we have done a whole conversation on the power of reflection. So make sure to check that out if you have not heard it. Like, we offer great feedback on how to do that. And make sure you set it up at an interval that makes sense. So I think in the beginning, the shorter interval is better, but not so short that you're having to do it so that you're like, oh God, I've got to reflect again, right? So I think 30 days is usually a good place to start, and not to make it some big elaborate reflection process like I used to do, right? Like, just again, make it something simple. And so the 3 R's: reassess, like your goals, like, this is what I've learned, this is the data. And then rinse and repeat, like if you need to pivot. And so the example from my 5K a quarter, what do I want to get out of that? And I alluded to it earlier, like it's not I don't even know if we get medals or t-shirts, actually. I assume, now that I'm thinking about it. But anyway, it's not bragging rights. It's that I want to reignite my confidence in myself and my ability to be able to do uncomfortable things and make them comfortable. How do I get 1% better every day? In this case, not only do I need to get the steps in, get the paint on the canvas, I also need to let it dry, right? I need to rest, like we spoke about earlier. And then check back in 30 days or so. For me, I'm also going to be able to check back in per race. And the app that I'm using, it's the Nike Run Training app. It's free. It's amazing. I love it. You actually have a little rating scale on a scale of 1 to 10. Najwa knows I love my 1 to 10 scales. So that after each run, you can rate your, effort. And so what that's going to enable me to do is, a recovery run in January was, let's say, a level 6, right? Well, in a month from now, same kind of time duration recovery run, what effort level is it? And I'm not looking for a big change from a 6 to a 2. I'm looking at something that is more like a 6 to a 5,
Mm-hmm.
because what that tells me, that small incremental change, is that that's sustainable, right? Like that I'm doing the things that are like starting to move the needle in a way that isn't such a stark contrast from like where I am, that I'm going to turn around and be like, whoa, this is super foreign and unknown. It's going to start to become familiar in a gradual way. And so that to me is progress. So that's what I think.
I love that. And as you were talking about the reflection questions, it on page 245 and 246, he says, then I reflect on my progress or lack thereof by answering these 3 questions. This is in reference to his annual review. What went well this year? What didn't go so well this year? And what did I learn?
Yeah.
Those are also very similar questions that I also put in my reflection and growth journal, which is available on Amazon. But those are important to be able to like encourage yourself to do that reflection. And as Johnna said, we talk a lot about different reflection strategies in the self-reflection podcast we did on her podcast, Should I Wish Someone Told Me? And I will make sure to link that below. But I also like that you said you have a tracking system as well. It sounds like supports you on your app. And it makes me think like, oh, okay. There are certain things I do track with apps, but then there are certain things like I haven't tracked. And so it's made me, I was sitting there thinking, I was like, how do I use a tracker for my morning routine? What does that look like? Or is it too stressful for me to do that? But something that really stood out to me, or as I was reading this, it became more of a reflection point for me. A lot of what I learned while teaching is the importance of procedures and routines for the kiddos. So what are those habits you're trying to have them build? How do you make it a satisfying thing for them? How do you make it obvious and attainable and move? It's all the things he listed. I was like, this brings me back to teaching days. So I was actually laughing about it. But I was sitting there, I was like, so how do I make sure I do this for myself in my morning routine? And I sat there and I was like, you know what? As I read, let me restack my morning routine, right? And I'm like, we're gonna wake up. After I wake up, I drink my water, right? And then after I drink my water, I do my morning meditation. And then after I do that, then I'll pop out of bed, brush my teeth, put on gym clothes, grab my little protein snack, head and do my workout. But I was also thinking, so wake up. After I wake up, that means I have to have the water by my bed to be able to drink, right? And I need to have my notebook by my bed to be able to do my morning meditative practices. Heading to the bathroom is going to happen either way. But I need to have my gym clothes out and ready, but thinking about the ways in which it goes back to the environment and some of the things which I already do to support myself and making sure this is an attainable, easy thing for me. So it does become second nature. And maybe it is like first step, writing it out. Second step, practice it multiple times. Practice means you get better at it. And thirdly, like continue doing it. Which is exactly what I spoke to people about doing in the classroom and doing routines with kids. So it cracks me up. It was like, I sound like teacher version of Najwa coming into the personal version of Najwa. But that's key. Write it out, figure out what you need for it, and practice. Make it happen. So
practice makes permanent.
Oh, I like that. Practice makes permanent. I purposely was like, I'm not saying perfect. I like that. Practice makes permanent. Yes. Practice makes permanent.
It's what I would tell my athletes whenever they like struggle through lifts. I'm like, we don't want it to look bad. Practice makes permanent. I'd rather you go lighter, do it well, and then build. So same thing like with habits. Like it's really cool to see like the same, and this is a testament to what you were saying also whenever you were thinking about like how to like for the kiddos like make it satisfying and make it easy. It's really like applying these same principles to multiple areas of life. And I think that there's value in being able to do that, because as someone who is self-diagnosed ADHD, like you said about like the list, like you need to restack your morning routine and you need to write it out. I'm like, Johnna, why have you not written it out? Because I'm trying to like get my morning routine in order, because oh my God, it takes me like 4 hours before I'm ready for the public. Like, and that's not me like, let me make myself, that's me like, let me meditate, let me walk the dog, let me like read my book, let me journal. And so yeah, I'm like, why? I need the list so that we get distracted. And I mean, I think that this also is not just people who have ADHD or self-diagnosed. Again, I'm not, clinically diagnosed, but it's better to have that anchor. Like if I get distracted, I come back to the piece of paper. And if you keep following the piece of paper or the list or your stack, I believe as you referred to it as, then you can more easily see like what's working or what's not. Like, oh, maybe I need to like move this, like, to the third thing that I do or like whatever. And so, yeah, I appreciate that perspective and that share because it's very valuable.
Of course. Yeah. Now, this is my goal as we leave the call. I'm going to actually have to put my list out and put it by the side of my bed, right? So I have it.
You can put in the comments if you can put in the description or in the comments like how it's going for you.
Oh, I can. I shall. I'm excited.
So, question for you, scale of 1 to 10, because I love those. What would you rate this book overall?
10 being bomb.com, recommend to everybody, and
1 being don't even look at it.
Okay. I'd give it a 4.
Okay.
I'd give it a 4.
Okay.
What would you rate it?
I feel bad about my rating now. It's like I'd give it like at least a 6 or a 7.
But different perspectives.
Because I'm like, it has been very helpful, but now after hearing your perspective, I'm like, oh yeah, like there are a lot of things that was said, like you mentioned, from a place of privilege. There are, some comments that could have been said more gently. And like you mentioned, the colloquialisms and also some of the contradicting like information and like strategies, like, be, flexible with your identity, but like don't kind of a thing. And then like about the contracts, it's like, set, small habits, but then like force yourself into doing them by like making a contract. And yeah, like I know a lot of times people say that it's not about the motivation to do things, it's about the discipline to do things. And I don't like either one of those terms because motivation is fleeting. And because discipline is like the definition of discipline is like to train yourself to obey a certain behavior. And so I like to think that it's figuring out like what's sustainable, like sustainability, like what is it for you? I did a video where like how I stay motivated for the gym. And it's like, I don't, like there are days I don't want to go. And do you know what I do then? I check in and I'm like, it's not discipline like we spoke earlier where I'm like, well, you're going to do it anyway. I check in and I'm like, is today a day that I need to like take off? Like today, for example, or is today a day that I need to go to get my reps in? It might not be the best workout. My effort level that's usually at, let's say, an 8 might be a 4, but I'm still going to go through the motions because that's just part of my identity and who I am now. I don't have to motivate. It's no longer this thought process of let me motivate myself or contract myself or discipline myself into doing this thing. It's just that like, yeah, I'm not feeling 100% today and I'm still going to go to the gym because it's on the agenda. It's what I do. Mm-hmm. Is it going to be the best workout? No. Am I going to feel bad about that? No, because I know I was here yesterday. I know I'm going to be here tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or maybe not necessarily yesterday or tomorrow, but sometime in the near future.
I get that. I do something similar with my morning routine too. I'm like, there are certain things at times I'm like, is this happening this morning? Why not? If so, what do I need in this moment? And some you just gotta flow at times and check in with yourself. So based on these ratings, who would you recommend this book for? Or who might this book be supportive for and why?
Okay, I think this book, so everything with a grain of salt, right? Like everything with a grain of salt. We're all in different places and spaces. And I think that this is a good place for someone to start who is looking to create a habit and doesn't have any techniques and like you're really looking to just get like an overall view, like something very comprehensive where it's like, hey, what are some strategies? But going into that with going into reading it and in, taking in this information, knowing that it's probably best if you keep a sticky note or something that's like, which one of these tactics would benefit me and why, so that you can, at the end of it, not just have this list of, whoo, boy, I got habit trackers and habit stackers and like this technique and that technique and contracts, but like you can see what it is that you feel might help you and what you hope to get out of that technique, so that you do have a starting point. And so, yeah, people who are looking for some strategies to create habits and want to do it like in like a self-paced kind of a way.
I would agree. And if people pick up the book, really focus on like choosing one thing at a time.
Yeah.
'Cause doing this all at once might just be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And really like get used to one thing and one strategy, then try the next strategy as well.
1%
Do
better.
that over a period of days and check in with yourself every 30 days, as Johnna said. What does that look like? Or it doesn't have to be every 30 days. You could do it on a monthly, a weekly, bi-monthly, up to the time period you want, but also build that reflection point in as well.
Yeah. Which
What?
you can do with your journal.
Yes, which you can do with the journal. What final takeaways do you have, or should for this call?
I think we've covered on all of them. I think to bring it home with the notion of setting habits, that what works for you today is and probably won't work for you tomorrow, and it shouldn't, because that is indicative of growth. And so if you find yourself in a space where you are feeling frustrated because the things that you used to do are no longer working, then perhaps I want to offer a reframe so that you celebrate that, because this is a time to create change, and this is a time to make a shift. And so I think this book can offer some ways and techniques and strategies in which to do that. And I think at the same time, if a year from now or 6 months from now you recognize like these were working but now they're not, instead of getting frustrated with that, doing what Najwa said and using that as an opportunity for reflection to say like, hey, maybe I just grew that much in that amount of time, that it's time for me to figure out what's working for me now. So to continuously get curious about what's working for me right now, which might be different than what it was yesterday.
Yep.
But whenever we're creating habits, I think that that is important, because the urgencies of life are real. Like, we are humans, we are not robots. And so just always being curious and doing these checks with yourself. Doesn't have to be a reflection process. It can be 1 minute out of your day where you're like, what worked today? Like, how was it? Did these strategies give me the results that I wanted? Why or why not? What can I do instead? So just constantly being curious about like, if this worked, and if it didn't, and if it did, what do you want to do differently?
Mhm.
What about you?
I'd say my final takeaway is when you recognize that space and that growth, or recognize that you would like to continue growing, find that zone of proximal development, or as James Clear said, the Goldilocks rule. Use the Goldilocks rule. What is the space where you have challenge and success, and move towards that? But remember, do it a little at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself, and that's going to work well. Um, as my counterpart said when I was teaching, focus on one thing at a time and do something that works with what you need. And so, with that, I am so glad that we were able to have this conversation today, Johnna.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Is there anything that you would like folks to be aware of later this year?
Just follow up on me at Hey Johnna Renée, TikTok and Instagram, and I can tell you how the 5Ks went
All right.
or are going.
Sounds good. And we look forward to it. I love my little hat. Oh my goodness. Oh, hey, y'all. I didn't realize I was recording. But while you're here, how about you hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications for future videos? See you later.